Hello, Dr. Roy. Welcome to my lecture presentation on invasive species for exam 1, part 3. Okay. What is an invasive species? An invasive species is an organism that is not native to the area, typically spread by human activity, whether that be accidental or on purpose. More often than not, it's accidental, but sometimes some species are introduced to areas and then they do become invasive after that fact. But typically it's by accident, and what makes them invasive is that they cause a negative altercation to the existing ecosystem structure that they're introduced to. And this is they normally thrive in the areas they're newly introduced to because they do not have any predation on them. When they're newly introduced, they're just the predators. They're not fallen prey to any species in that area because they're new. There's no sort of food chain for them in the environment they're introduced to. And a good example of that is the brown tree snake, which was native to Australia, mainly also Indonesia as well. And they were accidentally introduced to Guam in the 1950s, thought to be introduced by cargoes that were being shipped from Australia to Guam. The snakes just sort of found their way into the cargo, and when it was dropped off in Guam, they found their way out. And they were referred to as a ecological menace in Guam, which I thought was kind of a funny term to coin them as. But it's true, they were introduced there, and within 70 years, they were the reason that 9 of the 11 forest-dwelling birds in that natural region went completely extinct in Guam's islands, along with a big population of the lizards in Guam's islands were endangered as well. Not extinct, but 9 of the 11 birds were extinct due to these snakes. So they're definitely a very good definition, a very good example of an invasive species. What makes a species invasive? They're non-native to the ecosystem they're found in. You can have non-native species in particular regions, but when they sort of have these negative altercations, they can adapt very quickly to the area. They reproduce very quickly. That's when they are coined as invasive, because they're negatively impacting the area they're in, and they're reproducing very quickly. There's no population control of them because they're not prey to anything. They're just predators. Impacts of invasive species. So one of the many impacts that they can have is they can destroy the habitat that native organisms thrive in. And it sort of can lead to a chain reaction like it did with these nutria, I believe that's how you pronounce it, which is a large rodent species that is native to South America. But in the 1900s, they were brought to North America this was actually an instance that it was done on purpose. They were brought into North America by farmers to use their coats as fur to sell. But when they were not successful with that, some of them were released into the wild. And that's when they were new to this area. They did not have any predators, so they reproduced extremely quickly. They sort of just took up the land that they were in, and their diet consists of grasses and rushes, which is a aquatic plant, sort of like a grass, which are plants that were vital to the wetlands that they were. They were sort of introduced around the Gulf Coast area, around Chesapeake Bay, and their main diet consists of the exact wetland, marshy sort of aquatic species that live in this area. And this was obviously a major issue because these aquatic plants, the wetland, marshy ones, they provide food, shelter, nesting sites for many of the native organisms in that area, along with protecting the sediment in the soil from erosion. So when these rodents came into the area, they completely wiped out so much of this wet marshland, and they greatly impacted the community structure in a chain reaction sort of way. They can do harm to the economy, like in this example they're called water hyacinths. I'm not sure if that's the correct pronunciation of that, but in Lake Victoria in Uganda, Africa, it's the largest freshwater lake in Africa. It was the fundamental means of income for some. A very large fishing industry was around this lake area. These plant species are native to South America, but were introduced to Lake Victoria and Uganda for the beautiful flowers they produce. So this was also another instance where it was done on purpose. They were introduced without knowing how quickly they would spread, and they spread extremely quickly, and their roots are extremely thick and heavy, um, and so long that they often choked out a lot of the native species in this area. And they're so thick that they blocked sunlight from reaching the algae and other terrestrial plants in that area. So a lot of the fish that lived in this lake originally, their food supplies were extremely low. They could not reproduce as easy because they did not have food for energy. And so a lot of the fish population in this lake died off, which was a massive decline for the fishing industry, because that was a very sort of keystone means of income for a lot of citizens in Uganda, Africa. And along with that, they sort of blocked off a lot of the ports, so a lot of boats could not get through, which was another reason that the fishing industry is declining here. Yeah. Okay, so one of the means of sort of controlling invasive species eradication, sometimes other species are introduced in attempts to control the spread of invasive species, like this example, the prickly pear cactus, which is an invasive species in Australia. They were growing out of control into the range that farmers were using for livestock. And so the government actually stepped in and mitigated this by introducing their natural predators, which is this cactus moth caterpillar that you see over here. This is actually them eating a cactus. You can see that this is successful. So yeah, they were brought in to basically kill these cactus that were being an invasive species in Australia. And this was actually a successful eradication. But when you bring in a species, like I've sort of been touching upon the whole time, when you bring in a species, you're always at risk of that species becoming invasive, which is the case with a lot of sort of introduced species that are used to control invasive species. A lot of times, more often than not, they themselves turn into invasive species as well. So it's sort of like you have to find the balance. You have to find the predator to the prey that will, actually do what you want it to do, rather than just causing a whole different problem, which is seen more often than not. And my sources. I hope you enjoyed, Dr. Roy. Bye-bye.